Brisbane Lions are going to take on Geelong on Friday night at the MCG. That's a 7:50 start. And then on Saturday, Sydney will play host to Collingwood at the SCG, and that's a 4:45 p.m. start. The buck stops here has been sensational all year. Hand her over to Nathan Buckley now to take us through. Bucks.
Thanks, Gaz. We're going to go about this a little differently this morning. And we had two amazing games of footy that we need to celebrate. So it's kicked off with Melbourne, Brisbane, and that just continued what has been a great finals month already. And I want to unpack that game. So let's go back to some of the highlights, and then we'll come back and see if we can work out why Melbourne happened and how Brisbane were able to get over the top of them.
First team since 2016, the Demons, as the reigning premier, to go out in straight sets. We'll get to them, I'm sure, in this next half an hour, but I reckon you want to start with the winning team, Bucks.
I do, and Chris Fagan's comment then about pressure was instructional, because that has been the way teams have won the big games towards the end of the year, and that's the way they're going to win the big games in September. We've already seen that. They lost contested ball by 19, Brisbane. They lost clearances by 14. So they're considerable margins, and we've spoken about the profiles of different sides and that the numbers that we've traditionally thought, contested ball and clearance gives your forwards first access. Lock it away, get territory, squeeze, finish the game off. No, that's not the way the game's been played. When you're a high pressure side, when you're prepared to compete across the board, as Brisbane were, as Collingwood, Geelong and Sydney have shown, that's when you're going to win a game of footy, and that's how Brisbane ground out Melbourne.
Ground out is the pivotal term, because the first 15 minutes and 20 minutes of that game was, I think, as good a footy as Melbourne had played since very early on in the year. Their ball movement was crisp. Max Gawn was dominant. They were picking off forward targets.
Petrarca looked like he was fit and on top of the ground.
Brisbane defence, which was right in front of us where we were sitting, so we were overlooking their Brisbane defence, and they were all at sea. And they just failed to take their opportunities, Melbourne, either from massacred it inside, but more specifically early, missing shots at goal.
And we were talking about, I think Daniel Rich had 11 touches, I think, in the first quarter. Yes, 6 or 7 of those were kickouts that he ran out of the goal square, and because he wasn't defending. The back six weren't doing their primary role, which was to win contests against their direct opponents when the ball was in their area.
Melbourne looked more expansive, was the term we used. They were more inclined to come inside. Their first play was from Petty, bang, straight into the middle of the ground. The corridor opened up, and they were just flying forward. So for 20 minutes, and Brisbane Lions supporters can sit there and go, oh, yeah, they were slaughtered.
Correct.
And we did anyway. Maybe we were wrong. We're thinking, gee, this has got the possibility of getting real ugly.
Well, I would defy any Brisbane supporter who wasn't concerned at that point of the game, thinking, oh my God, we won a game last week that we weren't expected to win. We thought we'd come in with the same attitude, and we've just put 15 minutes of the most. I suppose that they were passengers in that game. Like Melbourne were just dominant. Yeah, Max Gawn, we mentioned in the call, 8 touches in the first 12 minutes of the game. He only touched the ball once between then and half time, and only 6 times for the rest of the game. So he looked to me like he was favouring that right adductor. He was concerned about it before the game. He came out with a burst, but just wasn't able to sustain it.
No, and credit to Darcy Ford, who's playing in place of Oscar McInerney, who just hung in, kicked a super important goal. So they get the quarter time, no damage, not as much damage done as they thought, as probably the numbers would suggest should have been done.
Well, I thought the last 10 minutes of the first quarter, Brisbane actually started squaring up. They definitely, statistically, they squared up contested ball.
Yep. And
they needed to, because whenever the ball went forward for Melbourne, Brisbane's defenders weren't getting the job done. So ultimately what ended up happening was that the pressure brought to bear by the Brisbane midfielders and high forwards actually gave their defence a bit of a chop out. And then by the end of the game, when Melbourne went forward into their forward 50, it was like a different game. Like they had all the space in the world in the first 15 minutes, and they could not find any time or space against the Brisbane defence and rollback midfielders in that second half. When it looked like they were going to be able to.
How well did they defend inside their defensive 50 after half-time particularly, but towards the latter half, which is exactly what you're saying. They've got an appetite for it. And then, as a result of that, they then started to move the footy off the line, and it was started with Coleman was the first one to really take it on. And then Hipwood. So how did you see that Hipwood May contest? I thought Hipwood was enormous, particularly after the first 20 minutes. Again, Hipwood was symptomatic of the whole Brisbane team. May manhandled him first 3 or 4 times. He manhandled him. We all looked at each other and he's got to be more competitive. He's got to stand up.
But was that a coming of age moment? I mean, he's been like a prodigy. Came in expecting to do all that, and he probably hasn't reached the heights. Like he's had some really good games, but he hasn't reached the heights of the hype that was expected initially. But this is a game, a final,
big final,
win or you're out. Joe Danaher pulls out at the beginning, at the start of the day. You know you've got Stephen May. He gets smashed in the first 15, and then he finds a way.
That's right, and that's Brisbane in a nutshell. And so I've never picked Brisbane as a chance to win the premiership all year. So I've got my hand up because I said I couldn't trust Danaher and Hipwood and McStay. Well, on the back of that, he wins your trust and wins your respect. And he's had really good games against Melbourne in the past, Eric Hipwood. Don't worry about that. But not when you've had to lead a forward half. So he had to take it all on his shoulders and said, I will lead. And he kicked goals when he had to kick goals. He contested when he had to contest. And it was just, I thought it was one of the great, well, not great, it was one of the really, really good finals performances from a key forward.
Well, to kick 4 against a guy who, so Stephen May smashed what I've considered as the best key forward in the competition for a long time last week in Tom Hawkins.
Yep.
Did not get anywhere near it in a game where Geelong were actually the dominant team for the majority of that match. And then he comes out and this kid does the job on him. I would like to suggest that Brisbane are worse off personnel-wise than they've been in any one of their finals campaigns in the last 3 years under Chris Fagan.
Possibly, yeah.
But they've just won 2 finals in a row based off what you need at this time of year, which is an absolute, single-minded focus on pressure and attitude.
And this year, you talked here on this program constantly about, hey, don't put it all on the coach. Don't put it all on the coach when they win. Don't put it all on the coach when they lose. It's a coaching group. So they go in at halftime. Oliver's had 13 against young Robertson. So Robertson's ability to do that job, I think, was a little beyond him at this stage. So Cameron Bruce, who's an assistant coach, says to Fagan, Berry to Oliver. And they hum and ah and say, okay, let's do it. And it was the match-winning move.
Correct.
And Berry, in our mind, was the most important player in the game because he went with Petrarca, who slowed as the game wore on, and turned it.
Well, this is an
22
example.
He had in the second half. Was it 22?
Yeah, 22. And this is an example, as it might not be your day, but it might be a moment. At halftime, Jared Berry's walked into the sheds and he's touched the ball 4 times. He's touched the ball 4 times as a wingman. And he's probably thinking, my God, I'm having a stinker.
Just on that, just before you go, on the mindset, though, of Berry, right? So he's had a quiet game. He texts, as has been revealed, he texts Chris Fagan during the week and says, give me Oliver. So he asks the coach to give him Oliver, and the coach says, no, we're going to go with Robertson. So just that's some context around it. 4 possessions, halftime. Oliver's off the chain a little bit, not to the then the call comes. All right, you got your wish. Now do something about it.
Yeah, you tell me that story. We see what's happened in the second half. I hope the kid can play in the prelim. I really do. I don't know exactly how it's going to pan out, but I mean, I know it's probably not on the balance of it. I think what happened is worth a week, but I hope we find a way to get it there.
Who would know, given the way that the whole thing works? But the Jeremy Cameron example that's been put up over the past couple of days with Marlon Pickett when he's on his back and he got $1,000 fine might be enough to get him out. I know we got challenged by a caller before 7, but I just. At the time when that happened, you just thought, oh my God, like this kid has won. He's been the most influential performer against the opposition's match winner. Yep.
And he's been not only has he done that job, but he's had 22 touches in a half as a midfielder, one contested ball, one clearance, put max pressure on. He was actually, his aerial capacity was huge for a midfielder. He's like Paddy Cripps running through the midfield, taking really strong marks and then dishing the ball off to the runners. Like it was an enormous performance, and it was bittersweet at that moment because you thought, oh, geez, he might not be there next week.
You meant May and Franklin. You said Hawkins.
Sorry.
Yeah, we know what you meant. So that works. Not only does he go to Clayton Oliver and quell him, he then wins the footy. He then becomes a dominating force. Like pushing Oliver off the ball at a contest doesn't happen. He did it 2 or 3 times. And so that is why he helped turn. And Lachie Neale was the other one who Brayshaw went to Neale early. The two had played a couple of weeks earlier where they had 22 each or 23 each and no great influence. And at half time, 9 possessions to Lachie Neale had no great influence.
No.
And then you talk about not your half, but maybe still your game. Out he comes and just has 16, 17 and rips it apart in the second half.
And Brayshaw had only had 7 at that point, so and they were umming and ahhing on Melbourne were obviously umming and ahhing on how to handle that. Sparrow went to Neale in for the majority of that second half, and that was as much to try and free Brayshaw up as anything, I think, because Oliver's getting locked away, Petrarca's getting sore.
He went to half forward though, Brayshaw.
He did, yeah. There was a few, like Melbourne still had the ball inside 50 more than Brisbane. They still won contested possession. They still won clearance. There was a lot of things that they have done well consistently that they did well. But then, as we've spoken about, there was a lot of things that they've struggled to get done that they didn't get done. So, and that was largely around their access into the forward 50. They took 7 marks inside 50 in the first quarter, and they only took
15 minutes.
I think they ended up with 3 for after quarter time.
Do you subscribe?
3 more.
We'll take a break and come back, and we can touch on Melbourne on the other side of it. Do you subscribe to the theory that the balance of their forward line was better without another tall? So the week before they lost McInerney, which meant that Crisp had to go and McVeigh had to go and ruck, which meant that they were only too tall. Danaher out so that they weren't as tall. Do you think that maybe there's something in that? The 3 tall McStay, Danaher, Hipwood is not as effective?
I've always thought that the traditional idea of a tall centre forward and a tall full forward, and then if you want to maintain those 2 key marking targets, you actually need to play 3. You need to play a third that rotates because you can't those units can't play for 100% of game time. So say you've got 1 for 80, 1 for 80, then you need a player that can come in and play that 40% role as a tall target. That's been the way that we've viewed. But if it's only one, if you've only got one of those tools, well, then sometimes you're going to have 6-2ers or 6-3ers that are actually doing your aerial work, but you can hunt the ball harder on ground. You can put more pressure on the opposition. I think that's Sydney's setup. I think Geelong with Jeremy Cameron, he plays as much as a flanker as he does as a key with Rowan. I think Collingwood's setup is a lot closer to the ground. I think the modern day forward lines, you can go in too tall, and maybe Brisbane's setup is advantaged by what's happened to him the last couple of weeks.
I firmly believe that, which makes it interesting with Danaher coming back. Charlie Cameron, dangerous, gets even more looks when there's not as many big, tall forwards. He's had 33 goals from 15 games.
Charlie Cameron only had five touches.
5 bloody good ones.
Had a text come in here that I think that deserves to be called. Gary, you were sensational on Friday night, given it was a Melbourne loss. What commentary should be? So,
well, that's very kind.
You don't get those that often, mate. I pulled that across. Just needed to get to it.
It should never matter who's playing as a commentator. So, but people, they see what they want to see or hear what they want to see.
But you have been a Melbourne man. It's pretty hard to get away from that. So, in terms of Melbourne, what do you take out of the season and this game in the last 2 games where they were in front a lot in games, like a long way in front, and got overrun late in games? Why did that occur?
Okay, so I had a good think about this for over the weekend or since Friday night. There's a number of different. So people say fitness. Is it fitness? Well, it might be. The Burgess factor, but that can be self-fulfilling. But I know that they believed. So at round 10, they're undefeated, right? So this is a bit of a theory. as a reigning premier, I would imagine the next year's the hardest thing in terms of edge, on the edge,
Yep.
Hunger. Now, I'm not saying they were self-satisfied, but it only takes a tiny percent. So by round 10, you're virtually playing the same team. There hasn't been much turnover, right? So there's a couple that have come in, a couple that go out. So you're feeling that good about yourself. And then you go, was it 6 and 8 or 8 and 6 in the second half?
6
and
wins, 8 losses.
7 times you get 20 points up in a game and lose. Like these numbers are just crazy, Bucks.
So it went round 11, 12 and 13 were the first three of those.
So led Freo by 30, lost by 35. Next week, led Sydney by 12, lost by 12. Led Collingwood the following week by 22, lost by 26. Now, would that happen when you are on the edge, dog hungry to try and do something that you haven't done for 57 years? Now, it might be no truth in any of this, but this is where I've arrived at. You sign up your long-term players, so all of these things add up to, yep, good. We're in a good space. We're comfortable. We know where our future is. We've got the premiership medallion. I've got already that locked away in the drawer. Then I'm looking at all these leadings and then so you're still good enough. You're still good enough. All of these things point to being you are good enough, but then whether it's just 0.5% of hunger off throughout the team, if you've got 20 players that are thinking that way, that's 10% off.
And it's very hard to turn around once that creeps in. You when you've been at the top, and then you say you've gone from being the most efficient, the hardest, most ruthless team, which is what they had to be,
which is what they built last year on. And because when you haven't won one for 57 years, you can jam that down the throat and you're buying it because you know it's there.
And breaking new ground is a lot more exciting than having to go back to the well and all of the work that you know that you've had to that you've had to do to get to this point. You've got to go and do again. So that is, I think that comes across, doesn't it, with premiers that are trying to repeat. Well, it happens every year, but you're trying to repeat. And when you get teams that stay there, we've already seen it's not necessarily based on talent. It's not necessarily based on specific attributes of players. I think it's the team dynamic, it's the energy, and it's the drive that you have towards the aggression to contest right here, right now. Not about what happened 12 months ago, not what might happen in a month's time. And that's what we've seen from all 4 of the teams that are still in the comp this year. Which is
for Melbourne team, as I said, there may be nothing in what I'm saying, or it might be just a tiny 0.5%. When you sit down and reflect on it and say, were you as hungry? Were you as prepared to do every single thing? Well, when I'm looking at all these leads they get to and they give it up, I start to question. And then you've got the mechanics of what happens out. So that's mental, right? Then the game. So you got this forward line that hasn't been able to cash in on this midfield. And then say, okay, but you're good enough. So you win 10 in a row because the midfield's just extraordinary and the defence is holding up. By the end of the year, the defence is crumbling. So 90 points plus, they gave up once
4 times,
last year.
In the last 4 games.
4 times in the last 4 games, they've given up 90 points. So you throw all those things in the melting pot, they're not good enough and don't deserve to be in the top 4 on the basis of the back half.
And we get carried away. Like remember pre-season, it was Melbourne were just that far in front, and then they go 10-0, and they're that far in front. Then Freo put that second half on them at the MCG, and you think, where'd that come from? And then it happens again against Sydney the next week. Then it happens again against Collingwood the next week, and then you get to the bye, and then you get the Melksham May issue, and then all of a sudden, you're still 10-3. But all of a sudden, you're thinking, okay, well, there's cracks here. And if there are cracks, they've got to come from somewhere. They've got to start somewhere. But when the opposition, I remember Lee Matthews way back when with Essendon, if it bleeds, you can kill it. And Melbourne showed that they were gettable, that they were vulnerable, and they gave teams and fed teams belief based on the little let go in their energy and in their effort. And this is where it can take you. But they can get it. I mean, obviously, they've got a lot of talent. They've been to the well and they can get back. But, geez, it takes a lot of work.
And all of those games, even back to Collingwood in whatever it was, round 21.
Round 13. Oh, sorry, 21, second time.
Got to 4 goals out. I remember looking at the time going, gee, this
back.
is – and they just give up. Not give up. Give up the lead. and get run over the top of. Anyway, that's the Melbourne and Brisbane analysis. We'll get back to the game if you want to revisit it, because there's still plenty to talk about. 1300 736 736 is the number. We'll take the 7:30 news headlines, and then we'll get stuck into the Magpies, who their charge into the prelims being one of the great stories of 2022, and we'll talk about them next.
We've been absolutely blessed with the final series today, and we've got two great finals to come this weekend. But there's still one to unpack from this weekend, and the Collingwood Fremantle game was huge.
Yeah, it was. So let's get a break and let's dig into it big time. So we'll get the whole build up to Collingwood and Fremantle. 90,000 plus at the MCG again. How good is that on a Saturday night? Would have been a shock to the system for the Freo boys. That was the biggest crowd they played in by about 40,000, I reckon, or 30,000 people. It was enormous.
Well, as one of our callers said, into 7, that it felt like it was a one-sided pre-match, and that's the way the AFL set it up to the grand final. But yeah, Collingwood were able to have that home ground advantage. They definitely met Fremantle a better side than they were going into the home and away contest as well, and they seem to have a momentum about them. The player that I loved was Jack Crisp, and the way that he takes the game on. I mean, we talk about the way that Collingwood play and their offense, but he epitomises it, and always and has for a long period of time, an underrated player.
Craig McRae, well, the premiership coach is always the coach of the year, but gee whiz, going to be hard pressed to push him off that mantle. What an impact he's had. And Justin Longmuir, I think, just voicing what the rest of us all thought, that they just got a bit overwhelmed and overawed by it. Never really looked like it, the Freo Dockers. No,
comprehensive was the word, I think, to describe that performance from Collingwood. And Craig McRae's words are right. This year, Collingwood have continued to get better and better, and there's been a consolidated effort with the go forward football and the capacity to be able to how do you balance your contest and your defence around that. But I don't think Fremantle didn't turn up. I don't think Fremantle played poorly, but they just weren't allowed to play well.
No, that's it. That's the point. I think I agree with you wholeheartedly. They never were allowed to get their game going,
and that is when you consider that as a Collingwood coach, player, and you know that when you impose your game style on the opposition, that it simply doesn't allow them to play well. That is a position of authority. It's a position of power, and you know that you can impose that sort of pressure, that sort of energy, that sort of scoring power going back the other way. Not that Collingwood scored heavily. I mean, they didn't rely on their offense.
They could have if they converted opportunities.
Well, yes, yeah, correct. So 11-13 by the end, but they just didn't allow Fremantle any time or space to go back and score themselves. 3 goals at the end, brought that margin back to 20 points. It was closer to a 10-goal win than it was 100%. A 3-goal win.
So you get into an area as a player or a team, which doesn't happen very often, I don't think. So I'm watching them walk out onto the ground, and they look the same as they did walking onto the ground in terms of level of excitement and enjoyment of each other. It was Braden Maynard giving Nick Dacos a kiss, and Nick Dacos was giving it the woo, and Jack Crisp was smiling, and it's the same as they looked when they came off after the win. So they got that confidence that they just want. They want the occasion. They want the pressure to come. They want the chance to be as good as they can be. And when you get into that zone, it doesn't happen all that often. Then you're just irrepressible, which is why they will go up to Sydney and understandably be as confident as they probably have been all year.
The 2 words that I'd use to describe what I'm seeing from that group at the moment is happy and fierce. And that's a great combination. And I think they're loving their work, clearly. They've got that combined feeling of contribution and worth. Noble out off the back, Quainer off the back. Nathan Murphy doesn't have to touch the ball that often. He provides energy and effort and contested effort. Nick Dacos has come in and been fantastic. Lipinski's been an underrated player. They actually the club put him up as an All-Australian candidate. That's how highly they rated him, through stages of the year. So And it is consolidated, and that's without even going to the match winners. The captain, Scott Pendlebury, has played 2 really good finals. I mean, he's been around forever. He's going to play. He's going to go close to playing as many finals as anyone ever has in the game. I mean, I think Selwood's 3 or 4 in front of him, but Scott Pendlebury's played and Steele Sybin have played a lot of finals together over the course of their career. I thought Jeremy Howe really stood up. He lowered his colours against Jeremy Cameron, and that if that came around again, it would be an interesting matchup. But he was brilliant, and I think he really is the key to Collingwood unlocking their very best football when he plays at his best. But it was an exceptional performance, and you can see that there's momentum for. There's momentum for 3 of the sides, and Brisbane are just
they got momentum.
They've shown to be a side that said, well, we don't really need it. We'll just give us a chance, and we'll compete, and we'll make the most of it.
So Jordan De Goey has had 2 great finals. Halfway through the year, it depends on who you talk to, gone out the door. Collingwood has taken the contract off the table on the back of some behavioural issues. St Kilda coming hard. He's prepared to look elsewhere. Geelong was said to be blah 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 blah. Now we've played 2 finals. The narrative changed. The public narrative has changed. Collingwood surely don't change, do they? Like they make their assessment on him on. We know he's capable of doing what he's done. The last 2 weeks wouldn't be a surprise for Collingwood.
No.
So they frame their offer to Jordan De Goey on the base. So you go, they've got to raise it by 100. No, they don't. I don't know the numbers, but they give their best offer, right, knowing full well that he's capable of ripping finals apart. The fact that isn't 1.2 million is the other issues which have dogged him, and their offer is to him. Here it is, whatever it is. Behavioural issues are included, and if you stay on track and are as good as we know you can be, and next year win a best. He hasn't been top 5 in a best and fairest.
Did you just say 1.2 million a year?
No, not now.
No,
I'm saying 800 now.
Yeah.
You be as good as you can be. You win a best and fairest. You do what you then. Correct. Capacity to earn $1 million.
Well, 800K a year is reserved for guys that are finishing consistently in the top 3 of their club's best and fairest. Now, Jordy De Goey still hasn't proven to be that player, but he is built for finals. He is a player that wins contested ball.
So he's 4th in his best and fairest. That's his first top 5 finish last year.
There you go. So he and last year was his most consistent year, and he is building as a player. But you can't get away from the off-field issues. You can't get away from the fact that can damage and derail campaigns, and you can't get away from the fact that that I reckon the club that you're with has supported you to the hilt. Now, he is paying them back in the last couple of weeks, and he's paid them. He pays them back when he's switched on and going, and he has developed consistently as a footballer. But there needs to be triggers on that, and I've thought all along, accept what the offer is. And he obviously he's in great shape. He's loving his footy. Like who isn't going to get swept up in what's going on at the moment? And Geordie's a part of that, and he's right in the middle of it. He's been a good finals performer for a long time. In 2018, Granny,
that whole final series,
absolutely, and big games, he gets it done. So like you can't.
And if you're on 800, if that's what it is, again, I'll say this. I don't know the figures, then that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to turn up and play and be in the best 4 or 5 players in a final.
One of the other parts of these long-term deals that are being looked for and given is you were just talking about Melbourne, how a year after you've won a flag, you've got a little bit of comfort.
Maybe, yeah.
They're people, it's human nature. When you need to work for something, you'll work a little bit harder. When you get it in your hands, you take it for granted. So you get a 6 or a 7 year deal, and you've got that guaranteed in your pocket. You've actually got to consider who you're giving that to, because there's some competitors, there's some professionals that don't do it for the money. They do it because it's part of who they are, and they do it because they're driven by it. They want to see how good they can be. They are the minority. So you've got to keep that. The crumbs going, you've got to keep the carrot in front for some, and I reckon it doesn't hurt to say, hey, here's a couple of years, but earn up to your next couple of years.
Exactly.
And here's a really big trigger for you to work towards.
Yep.
And I think that's human nature tells us that we should do that more often than not.